We've all met a person in our lives that had a lot of potential and could have actually done something with their life, and yet they totally wasted all of it. Whether it was bad decision making or just plain idiocy, they let it slip away and now they're a regular at the local college bar. That brings me to the DCEU, because man, did they waste a ton of potential. From pissing off and ultimately scaring away or firing extremely talented actors, to butchering their movies in post-production so bad that the director's vision is left on the cutting room floor. Every decision led us here to Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the final nail in the DCEU's coffin.
Everything is falling apart.
This movie has generic written all over it. The biggest thing that was rumored to be in this that might have actually surprised audiences didn't happen. Now, I'm not saying that I like the idea of them killing Arthur's son, because I didn't. Not every comic book should be adapted. That being said, this movie could have easily been written by an AI that was given all the superhero movie scripts over the last 5 years. A hero who has to learn to accept his responsibilities even after already going through that arc in the first movie. A main villain who was so bland he's not even worth talking about, and a misunderstood villain from the first movie who goes through a redemption arc after almost betraying the hero. Oh, and an actor who, as it turns out, is batshit crazy in the real world.
Oh my god.
The plot was as cookie cutter as it gets. A little bit of modern day politics sprinkled in with a basic buddy cop dynamic that the Thor movies did way better years ago. It's extremely annoying when movies can't move on from a character, so they drag them along to the sequel even though they really shouldn't be there. Orm was a solid villain in the first movie, and it should have stayed that way. Instead, they force him into this movie, which they claim was always the plan, but watching this makes you realize Mera probably had even more screen time, considering they had a child together who's central to the main plot line. Can't blame them for trying to minimize her role, but the movie just felt disjointed and unfocused. But of course, they kept the part where Mera saves Arthur in the end, because every male hero would be lost without a female character to save their asses.
Don't ask questions, just consume product and then get excited for next product.
Shockingly, this movie absolutely bombed at the box office. There were some weirdos trying to use some whacked out math to compare it to the first Aquaman or even the Marvels in an attempt to make it look successful. But with a $205 million price tag, there's no hiding the smell of failure here. Obviously, this isn't surprising when you consider how poorly superhero movies have been performing, and specifically DC's terrible track record over the last few years. The first movie was a roaring success, and I could sit here and theorize about why this movie wasn't, but put simply, it doesn't matter. Audiences didn't care enough to show up. That's all that counts at this point. I'm sure it didn't help that James Gunn has spent the last 2 years openly discussing his rebooted DC universe, so it's hard to get audiences hyped for a movie that's already part of a dead universe.
I guess I just don't care.
Hell, even Jason Momoa himself has already been preparing for this. Whether it's his rumored casting as Lobo in Gunn's reboot, or his admission that he knows audiences simply don't care anymore. The fact is, this movie really stood no chance the moment DC got rebooted, and most people knew that. The DCEU itself never really had a great chance of success. It came at a time where Marvel was perfecting their lighthearted superhero movie formula, and at the time audiences were clearly not interested in something so dark. I've said before I loved Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, but as a comic book fan I enjoy seeing superhero stories with different tones and environments. The general audience clearly didn't feel that way, and it sent DC into a panicked spiral it never really recovered from.
Well, there's no coming back from that.
There's arguments to be made about the streaming numbers, but the fact is people are much more open to watching anything at home than they are at theaters. There's no denying the DCEU has its hardcore supporters, but even their supposed wins like the Snyder Cut ended up doing way more damage than good. The fan base became so divided that there was no middle ground. Either you worshipped the ground Zack Snyder walked on, or you vehemently hated everything about the DCEU. Who knows where DC would be if they picked a path and stuck with it? Maybe audiences would have grown to appreciate the differences in DC's approach to storytelling, but as it stands, the DCEU pretty much broke the remaining DC fans, and came off as a cheap copy of the MCU to general audiences who were already beginning to grow tired of Marvel after Endgame.
Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying, okay?
This movie had all the odds stacked against it. It was the final movie in a universe that went out like a wet fart after multiple attempted rebrands and course corrections. The first Aquaman movie surprised everyone with its success, and whether that was due to women going crazy over Jason Momoa or the post-Infinity War superhero craze, the sequel clearly didn't benefit the same way.
The only power I have is that I believe we can do better.
The DCEU was flawed from its conception. A story that was initially planned to include only a few movies was forced to expand in an attempt to mirror the highly successful MCU formula. They took every opportunity to react out of fear and change their minds on a daily basis. One minute, all the actors are gone, only to be replaced with the Justice League led by Supergirl and Batgirl. The next minute, Henry Cavill is back, alongside The Rock's Black Adam, and they're the new leads of the DC universe. Then Gunn comes in and reboots the whole damn thing. Here we are witnessing the DCEU's final failure, and I wish I could say I have hope for DC's future, but right now the new DCU seems like it'll be lucky to release a movie or two before it suffers the same fate as all the previous plans before it did.